Hello, my name is Julie Kelley, and I will be presenting the current events, red tide's effects on marine mammals in the Gulf of Mexico for our STEM class investigating through Ecojustic at the University of West Georgia with Dr. Stacy Britton. Why I chose this current event is that I find marine life and the ecosystem of oceans very interesting. I also have a deep love for mammals and animals. For a topic to be classified as STEM, it must include collaboration, solving problems that occur in real life, and kinesthetic learning. In addition, I wanted to research and gain more knowledge in this topic as to why the red tide was so deadly in 2018. Red tide and its effects on ocean mammals. Red tide made sea mammals chronically ill and fatally sick. In 2018, the Gulf of Mexico lost four more times the dolphins than the yearly loss of 173. So, normally the loss of dolphins would be 173, but in the year 2018, that amount drastically grew. And it was because the effects of red tide and how it progressed in the year of 2018. The red tide is sea particles or spray from the oceans, and they're filled with toxic drops. And how this happens is the breaking in surf lofts and then the toxic sea droplets, and they progress due to stagnant water and animal waste and human waste. And it also has to progress and grow by stagnant or not moving water. However, it does have to also move to progress and grow. The problem is in those certain spots in the ocean where the algae is growing, the water doesn't move as fast. It's still moving. However, the current isn't moving as fast and free moving in normal waters. And this is a problem. And this actually allows that algae bloom to grow and progress. Red tides populate in western Florida as a result of algae blooms. The algal blooms are a type of diverse population of life forms. In the Gulf of Mexico, red tides grow much slower and thrive, and it is called phytoplankton. So, in the Gulf of Mexico, those red tides do grow um, at a slower pace per se, but they are more evident in the Gulf of Mexico due to the slower moving currents in those areas. Forces that force the progression of the red tide. Red tide algae is a type of algae that can move with the currents. This is why it can be problematic. So some algae can't actually grow when they're moving, but the red algae actually can grow while it moves. So that makes it more problematic. The algae grows and thrives in environments that have lots of nutrients and water. For example, parts of the ocean where water moves slower and the environment is full of petrified materials. Human waste, dead fish, and ocean life also contribute to the algae flourishing and growing in the Gulf of Mexico. Many environmental events can influence the progression of the red tide. Several factors make some years particularly bad. Changes in the direction of the tides can influence the severity of the red tide, including weather events like tropical storms. Factors that influence the progression of red tide. Human waste does provide red algae part of the environmental factors needed to grow and spread. However, ocean life also does. So even if human waste did not make it into our oceans, the problem would still be evident. We can see that human waste is definitely an influence in the environmental factors for red tide to progress and grow. But even if we didn't have human waste, we can still see that fish waste or ocean life waste is still a prominent factor in the progression of red tide. As you can see in this image, dead fish waste is a contributing factor to the progression of red algae. How we can teach kindergartners about red tide and its effects on animals. Teaching students about red tides and ocean currents using cold water, blue dye, hot boiling water, red dye, and using ocean animals can teach students about the red tide and how it can progress through ocean tides. Students will witness currents in the water as the reaction occurs between the cold and hot water. This is an engaging activity where students are up, engaged, and the red and blue dyes gives them an engaging visual of how the red tide moves and affects the ocean mammals. Georgia's science, STEM, and math standards used to teach red tide current events. As you can see, the Georgia Department of Education represents the following science standards to teach this lesson. We can use science standards to obtain, evaluate, and communicate information to investigate the flow of energy and cycling of material within an ecosystem. Using that STEM activity, students can actually see that just using cold water alone, the water doesn't move. It's just stagnant. It's just there, the blue cold water. But when you use the hot, boiling red water and mix it with the cold water, you can actually see a reaction and how currents are created. So when students look, they can actually see the water move and it's red, thus representing the red tide and how it can affect the animals and their health. We can use the standards to evaluate, claim evidence, and reasoning of the relationship between the physical factors. And we are designing a scenario to demonstrate the effect and the change of an ecosystem. So, as they're actually watching this cold and hot water combined, we can see the currents take place. And then we can also see how the red dye is acting as a red algae tide, and it's fast moving and growing and moving throughout the water and the mammals. The Georgia Department of Education 2025 presents the following math standards that can be utilized to teach this lesson. Observe and compare the physical attributes of objects and analyze graphical displays of data to answer relevant questions. Ask questions and answer them based on gathered information, observations, and appropriate graphical displays to solve problems relevant to everyday life. We can see that through this STEM activity, students can gain a deeper insight of how red tides affect animals. And they affect animals' health and unfortunately, when these red tides explode and progress, it can damage the ocean life's lungs and make it impossible for them to actually function and breathe and swim. So even dolphins and sea turtles are killed because of this problem. Math and science subjects used in sequence teaching kindergartners. Using math and science standards, one can educate students on important current events like the red tide. One may even ask if you could attempt to teach kindergartners about red tide. However, after researching the kinds of STEM activities that can be used to teach this, I found the current STEM activity where you can use cold water, blue dye, hot water, red dye, and current events in water to show the effects of red tide and how it progresses and moves through ocean currents. The math standards used to help students look at life situations by using data and graphics. Students will see that without using cold water and adding the contrasting hot water, you cannot create events and you will not see the red dye move. In order for red algae and the red tide to progress, there must be a current and moving water. However, for it to grow and progress, it does have to be in slower moving water. But for it to spread, it does have to move. Marine Life Explorer 2025. This is a great way for students to use critical thinking skills, collaborate, and work together as a whole group. STEM is all about collaboration, thinking at a higher level, and thinking of a way to solve real life problems. So, allowing kindergartners to complete the STEM activity, they can also discuss ways to help prevent the spread of red algae or red tide. Of course, if humans take better care of the earth and we prevent our waste from entering the oceans, that would help. But again, as we've stated before, even though humans can prevent the spread of our waste, there's still that natural waste from fish and ocean life. So even with humans decreasing their waste, there's still going to be that natural ocean mammal and ocean animal waste that is evident in our oceans. As you can see, I have the references listed here so you can see where I gathered my information. I appreciate you listening to this presentation, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week.